Hungry Reader here. It's been a while since my original Wizard of Oz review, hasn't it? It's about time that we started talking about the many sequels. But first, I have a question for you. What's the sequel to The Wizard of Oz called? It's not Return to Oz, nor is it Journey Back to Oz. Many people don't even realize that there is any sequel, official or not. Of course, it doesn't help that there have been any number of unofficial sequels ever since The Wizard of Oz first entered the public domain in 1956. But even in Baum's own time, there was sequel confusion, and it all started when he was bitten by a certain bug. The success of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz had made L. Frank Baum and his partner W. Denslow famous, but they weren't really rich and famous until they licensed the book to Broadway, where it became an incredibly popular musical extravaganza. For those of you not born in the 19th century, an extravaganza was a popular form of musical production, characterized by lots of pretty girls, special effects, broad comedy, and little to no storyline. Basically like if the Chuck E. Cheese Pizza Time Theater showed a little more leg. The Wizard of Oz stage musical was Baum's first experience with seeing his work chopped up and remixed for completely different tastes than his own. Of course, thankfully that would be the last time that happened, right? For example, the musical was the first time the story was renamed simply The Wizard of Oz, as we know it today. But the musical The Wizard of Oz resembled the book in much the same way the movie Super Mario Bros. Resembled the video game. It shared a few proper nouns, and that's about it. The story follows several people who have been brought from Kansas to Oz by a tornado. Dorothy, her pet cow, the former king of Oz, and his girlfriend the gluttonous waitress. They take opposite sides in the battle to overthrow the wizard's evil regime, and the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman appear in the roles of the clown and straight man. Strangest of all, the Cowardly Lion's part has been completely rewritten into an ordinary lion who can't talk and isn't cowardly. At least Dorothy still has that funny little jester costume from the book. As blasphemous as all this may sound, the musical made Baum and Denslow very wealthy, even enabling Denslow to buy his own private island and crown himself King Denslow the First. Disagreements over the profits, though, put a sad end to their formerly close partnership. They even published competing newspaper comics at this time, Denslow's Scarecrow and the Tin Man, and Baum's Queer Visitors from the Marvelous Land of Oz. Language was different. Mr. Baum wasn't just kicking back and buying islands for himself, of course. He had written several new fantasy novels since The Wizard of Oz, but the letters kept pouring in from child after child, all wanting to hear more about the Scarecrow and the Tin Man. Mr. Baum saw the writing on the wall, and he sat down and wrote The Marvelous Land of Oz. This second Oz book is clearly colored by Mr. Baum's experiences on Broadway. Because they were so popular in the musical, the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman are now the stars of the story, and the dialogue is now filled with puns, rapid-fire comic business, and a little bit of cheesecake. But the biggest influence on Oz that was introduced in this book was this new illustrator, Mr. John R. Neal. He would prove to be the most lasting influence on Oz in general. Of the 40 original Oz books, 35 are illustrated by John R. Neal. That's 13 by Baum, 19 by Ruth Plumley Thompson, and 3 by Neal himself. Yet despite this apparent enthusiasm for Oz, Mr. Baum never did work quite as closely with Mr. Neal as he had with his old partner Mr. Denslow. Whatever the reason, Mr. Baum's relationship with his most dedicated illustrator was aloof at best. Now, the copy that I grew up with didn't even have the Neal illustrations. It's a 1979 edition, with illustrations by the accomplished British artist Kevin Madison. Although these illustrations look nothing like anything from the turn of the century, they are charmingly puffy and balloon-like and very in the spirit of the 70s. Some parts even suggest a Sid and Marty Krofft production. One thing's for sure, though. This version of Oz, someone really needs to invent the ironing board. And that brings us to the bug. The story goes that Mr. Baum was on the beach at San Diego's beautiful Hotel del Coronado with a young family friend when she happened to find some kind of sea creature. She held it up and asked Mr. Baum to tell her what it was. Instantly he replied, "A Woggle-Bug!" Yes, Woggle-Bug. Mr. Baum was so taken by his own turn of phrase that he went right back to his typewriter and wrote in a Woggle-Bug. It all starts when a teacher discovers a tiny bug living in his classroom and puts him on a projector to show the kids just what a Woggle-Bug is. The Woggle-Bug naturally steps off the screen and escapes because this is Oz and that's how things work. After raiding a tailor's shop for nice clothes, the Woggle-Bug meets up with the Scarecrow and Tin Woodman and joins them, making terrible puns, being really unhelpful, and making no friends whatsoever. A pompous, vain, self-absorbed windbag that nobody likes? Great character, right? Certainly no one you would ever merchandise. Oz historians will tell you that the Woggle-Bug was a national fad among America's children, like Pokemon or Tamagotchi. I'm calling BS on that. You can flood store shelves with tons and tons of merchandise, but that won't make the character popular. But why push the Woggle-Bug over all the other new characters from the book? Wouldn't the iconic and memorable-looking Jack Pumpkinhead have looked better on t-shirts? Well, as it turns out... Mr. Baum was still hungry to be on Broadway, and his new book had been written specifically to be converted into an extravaganza. It was loaded up with dancing girls and contemporary political commentary right from the first draft. Not only that, but Dorothy and the Cowardly Lion weren't even in the book because they hadn't been popular in the musical. Even after all that, though, it still had to be altered drastically for the stage. To start with, David C. Montgomery and Fred Stone, who are now famous for originating the roles of the Scarecrow and Tin Man, didn't want to return for this new sequel, for fear that they would be typecast as scarecrows and metalmen for the rest of their Broadway careers. A valid concern. So the book that had been written to feature their characters had to be written again, and the Straight Man and Clown became Jack Pumpkinhead and the Woggle-Bug. The Tin Man and King Scarecrow were replaced by Lord Stunt and Sir Richard Spud. Get it? Richard Spud? Dictator? It's strange to me that the play would be renamed The Woggle-Bug when Jack Pumpkinhead is a much more important character in the book. This is just my own theory, it's not documented, but I suspect it's because Mr. Baum's bitter rival King Denslow had his own book-turned-musical playing the same year, The Pearl and the Pumpkin, starring another Pumpkinhead. Were pumpkins a big fad among kids that year or something? Had Thomas Edison just invented the electric jack-o'-lantern? By now, both musicals, The Wizard of Oz and The Woggle-Bug, have passed into complete obscurity. But there is one byproduct of The Woggle-Bug that has unfortunately survived. The Woggle-Bug Book, an unofficial third Oz book. The bug has escaped from Oz and is lost in America, and, just as he did in the musical, has fallen in love with a checkered dress, obsessively courting anyone who wears it. Or, as the book says, he always made love directly to the costume that had so enchanted him, without any regard whatsoever to the person inside it. Language was so different. In my Wizard of Oz video, I posited that Mr. Baum avoided the ethnic humor that was so popular in the day to show how ideal Oz society was. But this book takes place in America, not Oz. And there's only 3 words to describe the humor in this book. Oh my God! I wish this were all symptomatic of deep-seated misanthropy on Mr. Baum's part, but no. People in my country, the United States of America, thought this was hysterical. However, it will probably surprise no one to learn that the musical The Woggle-Bug was a massive, expensive flop. The original Wizard of Oz musical ran for nearly 300 shows before going on tour. The Woggle-Bug closed after less than a month. Mr. Baum's gold bug had come back to bite him in the butt. Sure, he still had his lucrative writing career to fall back on, but the failure of the Woggle-Bug ate at him for years, until, in 1913, he tried one more time. The Tick-Tock Man of Oz started out as an adaptation of the third Oz book, Ozma of Oz, but by the time it made it to the stage, there were 7 Oz books, so it became a sort of medley of Baum's greatest hits. It starred Tick-Tock, who'd made his debut in the third book, but also featured some plant people from the fourth book, the Shaggy Man, who was the star of the 5th book, and even a few elements straight from the Woggle-Bug, all mashed up together like a Weird Al Yankovic polka. But one persistent bugaboo remained from the Woggle-Bug production. Baum still couldn't use many of his own characters who had already been in previous musicals. Undeterred, Mr. Baum simply renamed his beloved characters, so Dorothy Gale became Betsy Bobbin. By now, Mr. Baum had learned a few tricks to keep from leaving money on the table. No sooner had he finished compiling his last 7 books into a musical than he converted the musical back into an 8th book, Tick-Tock of Oz. But there was one character who remained conspicuously absent through both the play and the book. A certain Bug who had lost Mr. Baum a lot of money, and who continued to appear in the books, but never appeared on stage or film ever again.
Who was the bug that bit Baum? It wasn't the Woggle-Bug, nor was it the Love Bug, or even the Disco Bug. It was the Broadway Bug, and the Broadway Bug's bite affected Baum for the rest of his life.
It may have cost him time, money, and hair, but who can blame him? Has any writer or artist ever put pen to paper that didn't fantasize that one day they might see their creations brought to glorious life? That was a dream that came true for Mr. Baum, and afterward he was never the same. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz may have been a straight novel, but after he saw The Wizard of Oz, every Oz book was an extravaganza waiting to happen.
But this book, The Marvelous Land of Oz, is the one with the strongest Broadway flavor, and we'll be biting into it real soon. Hope you're hungry!